7. Black music legends with shocking satanic secrets they tried to bury. What if some of the greatest voices in black music weren't only battling the charts, but battling the shadows behind them on Legends of Black Excellence? We're opening 7 files that fans still argue about decades later. A blues man linked to a midnight crossroads bargain, a funk prophet accused of recording in eerie rituals, a guitar god haunted by night visions, a purple icon wrapped in symbols, a modern queen hit with courtroom witchcraft claims a survivor who chanted her way to freedom, and a hitmaker whose agelessness sparked immortal rumors. Fact, folklore, or fear? Watch closely, then tell me what you believe. Like, subscribe, and stay to the end. Robert Johnson. Robert Johnson remains a towering figure in early American blues, not because he left a vast catalog, but because what he did record feels like a doorway into another age. He was born in 1911 in Hazelhurst, Mississippi, in a South that almost never preserved the lives of poor black musicians on paper. Moving between relatives and towns, he learned music the way many Delta players did, by listening, watching, and soaking up sounds from porches, churches, work camps, and weekend dances. His early reputation, according to older performers who later remembered him, was of a hungry young guitarist who hadn't yet found his full voice. Then, in the early 1930s, Johnson slipped away from the local circuit for months. When he resurfaced, people noticed a leap that felt abrupt. His guitar lines were tighter, his slide runs sharper, and his timing suddenly locked in. The Delta already carried old tales about a lone player meeting a mysterious figure at a rural crossroads and returning with uncanny skill. Johnson never publicly authenticated that story, but he didn't stomp it out either, and in a culture built on oral memory, silence can turn into fuel for folklore. His entire verified studio output comes from 2 Texas sessions in 1936 and 1937. From those visits, we get 29 master recordings, astonishingly few, given his later reach. The songs throb with images of pursuit, temptation, and dread. Titles like Crossroad Blues, Hellhound on My Trail, and Me and the Devil Blues pushed listeners toward supernatural readings. Though blues language thrives on metaphor, devil often meant addiction, violence, or the hard pull of desire. Johnson's gift was making those metaphors feel intimate and immediate, like he was singing the private fears of everyone in the room. Do you think a myth can become truth simply because it explains what we can't? Johnson lived as a roaming performer, moving from juke joint to juke joint, playing for crowds hungry for relief after brutal work weeks. Accounts describe him as magnetic, sometimes solitary, always ready with a song that cut close to the bone. Then, on August 16, 1938, he died near Greenwood, Mississippi at 27. No autopsy was done, and the official cause remains uncertain. The most plausible historical explanation is poisoning, possibly whiskey tampered with by a jealous husband after Johnson was seen courting a local woman. Witnesses later described severe pain and delirium, but with no formal medical record, the details stayed loose enough for legend to grow. Even his burial place is disputed, with multiple sites claimed over time, reinforcing the sense that he vanished into mist. After his death, reissues reached young musicians building rock and modern blues, and they treated Johnson's records like a blueprint. They learned from his thumb-driven bass patterns, his layered melodies, and his ability to sound like 2 players at once. His influence poured into countless later songs even when listeners didn't know his name. So were there satanic secrets to bury? The responsible answer is no. There is no reliable evidence of occult practice or a literal bargain. What survives is a folk narrative shaped by sudden mastery lyrics that flirted with darkness, and a life cut short inside a paper trail full of holes. The legend may never fade, but the real miracle is already on record: a young Delta musician who turned struggle into sound that still feels electric. Sly Stone. Sly Stone's arc is a study in how a single mind can rewire popular sound, and how the same fire that powers innovation can scorch its maker. Born Sylvester Stewart in 1943, he grew up in Northern California in a Pentecostal home where music was both devotion and discipline. He learned keyboards, guitar, bass, and drums early, and by his teens he wasn't merely playing. He was arranging, experimenting, and listening for connections other people ignored. Before stardom, he worked as a radio DJ and staff producer already known for pairing styles that polite industry rules kept apart. Gospel call and response, gritty R&B drive, rock attitude, and psychedelic color all lived side by side in his ear. In 1966, he formed Sly and the Family Stone, and even the lineup felt like a cultural blueprint, men and women, black and white musicians all sharing the center. That wasn't cosmetic. It matched the music communal kinetic and insistently forward-looking. Hits arrived fast. Dance to the music. 1968 blew the door open, and everyday people reached #1, turning a message of shared humanity into a hook anyone could sing. Through 1969, the band stacked a run of defining singles, Stand Hot Fun, In the Summertime I Want to Take You Higher, and their Woodstock performance became a symbol of a multiracial, mixed-gender America that many wanted to believe was possible. Then the temperature changed. The late 60s optimism curdled into war-fatigue political trauma and street-level despair. Sly's art absorbed that shift. There's a Riot Going On, released in 1971, sounded like dawn after a night that went too long. Slower tempos, murky textures, and a bruised intimacy that felt less like a rally and more like a confession. People close to him have described how he began recording in near total isolation, layering parts alone, tightening control while pushing bandmates further away. The brilliance didn't vanish. It turned inward like a city pulling its gates shut during a storm. That question matters because much of the Satanic Secrets framing grows out of his visible unraveling. As Sly's behavior became unpredictable, missed rehearsals, late arrivals, sudden disappearances, spectators searched for a dramatic explanation. Stories about eerie studio habits, strange symbols, or unseen inspiration began circulating. But these tales are not established as verified proof of occult practice. What is well documented is a different cause escalating drug use, especially cocaine and PCP plus paranoia and exhaustion. Under that pressure, mistrust hardens, sleep collapses, and even ordinary eccentricity can look like ritual to outsiders. The collapse was human, not supernatural. The fallout was brutal. The band's Unity splintered tours became unreliable and members drifted away. By the late 1970s, Sly's public presence narrowed into long absences and sporadic returns. For years, he lived on the margins of the industry he once led, while his innovations spread everywhere without him. Funk architects borrowed his elastic bass drum marriage. Rock and soul acts studied his stacked vocals and jagged groove shifts. Hip-hop producers later found his catalog a treasure chest for sampling because his tracks were already built like miniature universes. Sly Stone died in June 2025 at 82 after years of illness. But the argument over his story lingers. If we're honest, there's no credible evidence that he hid satanic allegiance. What he did leave is something more enduring, a musical language of togetherness, contradiction, and raw rhythm, followed by a cautionary reminder that genius still lives in a body, and bodies can break. Jimi Hendrix. Jimi Hendrix arrived in popular music like a bolt that rewrote the sky. Even if you ignore every rumor that later swirled around him, the documented reality is jaw-dropping. In a few short years, he expanded what an electric guitar could say, and he did it with a vocabulary that still sounds futuristic. Born in Seattle in 1942, he grew up in a home marked by instability and scarcity. Those early conditions sharpened his sensitivity. Music wasn't a pastime, it was a lifeline. When he got his first cheap guitar as a teenager, he practiced with the intensity of someone building a way out. His apprenticeship was tough and unglamorous. Before anyone called him a star, he worked the R&B circuit as a sideman playing behind singers night after night. Those gigs were a grind, but they taught him disciplined timing and how to make each note earn its place. He briefly served in the U.S. Army, then returned to the road with a growing reputation as a player who could make a band lift off. Still in America, he was often boxed in by race and genre expectations. The bigger opening came in 1966, when he went to London and formed the Jimi Hendrix Experience. What happened next felt like a fast-moving revolution. In a city already crowded with celebrated guitarists, Hendrix stood apart because he treated sound itself as clay. He didn't limit himself to clean tones. He shaped feedback into melody, turned distortion into atmosphere, and used the amplifier like a second instrument. Songs such as "Hey Joe, Purple Haze, The Wind Cries," "Mary and Foxy Lady" made him an international sensation within a year. His performances weren't just concerts, they were controlled detonations. At Monterey Pop in 1967, he famously set his guitar on fire at the end of a set. Some later tried to read that act as occult theater, but in context it was dramatic showmanship, an artist declaring he would not play by old rules. When a musician's gift feels unreal, do we celebrate the work or invent a darker explanation? Because that's the point where myth begins to shadow Hendrix. As fame accelerated, the strain on his body and mind intensified. He toured relentlessly, recorded under pressure, and lived inside a business structure full of contracts and managers he didn't fully trust. Friends described him as gentle off stage sometimes, shy, often exhausted. Insomnia became a daily enemy. To force sleep after shows, he leaned on alcohol, marijuana, and powerful sedatives. In that fog of fatigue, he sometimes spoke about feeling watched or overwhelmed, comments that grief and hindsight later inflated into stories of entities or night visitors. None of that is established as factual proof of supernatural forces. What is clear is that he was burning out. By 1969 to 70, he was trying to redirect his life. He formed Band of Gypsies, leaning into heavier grooves and a more politically grounded sound, hoping for independence and space to breathe. But the pace didn't slow and his health didn't recover. On September 18, 1970, Hendrix died in London at age 27. The verified medical finding was asphyxia after vomiting with barbiturate intoxication involved. He had taken a dangerously high amount of strong sleeping pills after drinking. The inquest returned an open verdict, meaning no proven homicide or suicide. The tragedy doesn't need demons to be haunting. Hendrix was a human being with a rare mind pushed at an inhuman speed and caught in a deadly mix of exhaustion and substances. What remains is the music, a short, incandescent run that permanently widened the language of rock, funk, soul, and everything that came after. Prince Rogers Nelson was a rare kind of artist, not only a brilliant performer, but a complete creator who treated music, image, and meaning as one living system. Born in Minneapolis on June 7, 1958, he grew up in a home touched by conflict but also by sound. From childhood, he played multiple instruments, wrote songs instinctively, and most importantly, developed a need to control every step of his craft. For Prince, the studio was not a place to capture music. It was a place to build entire worlds. In the early 1980s, he erupted with albums that fused funk rock pop and new wave in a style only he could command, Dirty Mind. 1980 and 1999, 1982 established him as daring and precise, a man unafraid to place sexuality, faith, loneliness, and power inside the same song. But the real cultural earthquake was Purple Rain in 1984. The album and film turned Prince into a global symbol. His stage shows felt like church and nightclub at once, sweaty, sacred, and emotionally dangerous. That scale of talent made people search for explanations beyond the ordinary, and that's where darker folklore began to trail him. Prince always worked in symbols. The color purple, his visual codes, the way he shaped light movement and costume, everything carried layered meaning. In 1993, he changed his name to an unpronounceable glyph, later nicknamed the love symbol. Many fans saw it as a bold artistic move. Conspiracy circles tried to frame it as an occult sigil. The grounded truth is simpler. Prince was in open conflict with his record label over ownership and freedom. He used the name change as protest, and even appeared with the word slave written on his face to make the point unmistakable. That was not a turn toward darkness. It was a fight against control. As the years passed, Prince became even more independent. He recorded constantly released music at a pace few could match and expanded Paisley Park into his own creative kingdom. People who worked with him describe intense discipline, long rehearsals, exacting standards, and a drive that never cooled. Offstage, he was private and hard to read. That combination, extreme creative output plus personal secrecy, made him a magnet for myth. When outsiders couldn't see the engine, some imagined hidden forces beneath the hood. The final chapter of his life, however, was tragically human. On April 21, 2016, Prince died at age 57 at Paisley Park. The official cause was an accidental fentanyl overdose. 1 week earlier, his private plane had made an emergency landing after he became unresponsive and was treated with a medication used to reverse opioid effects. This wasn't a supernatural drama. It was part of the wider opioid crisis that has taken countless lives across America. There is no credible evidence that Prince practiced Satanism or engaged in secret occult rituals. Stories about shadowy plots or missing materials largely come from speculation fueled by shock and grief. If we connect his story honestly to the title, then the shocking secret is not satanic at all. It's cultural. When a black genius grows so large that ordinary language can't hold him, society often invents a myth to explain the size of the light. Prince's legacy doesn't need demons to make it powerful. The music is already the mystery and the miracle. Beyoncé. Beyoncé's career is one of the most visible, measurable success stories in modern music. Yet she has also become a magnet for rumors about dark secrets. The responsible way to discuss her is to separate what's documented from what's imagined. Beyoncé. Giselle Knowles Carter was born in Houston, Texas in 1981 and raised in a family where faith, discipline, and ambition were daily habits. Long before superstardom, she trained relentlessly, vocal coaching, dance rehearsal, talent competitions, and years of learning how to carry pressure in public without cracking in private. Her polish didn't appear overnight. It was built. Her first world-famous platform came through Destiny's Child in the 1990s. The group's success wasn't a fluke of fashion. It was powered by tight harmonies, constant touring, and Beyoncé's steady leadership while still very young. When she launched her solo career in 2003, she arrived not as a lucky breakout, but as a seasoned professional. Over the next 2 decades, she kept reinventing herself. Hit albums, visual projects, and tours that treated performance like cinema. Her concerts became a benchmark for endurance hours of choreography delivered with vocal control and athletic precision. That kind of consistency across decades is rare, and rarity often invites myth. One major spark for the darker talk was her discussion of Sasha Fierce, the on-stage persona she used in the late 2000s to access a bolder performance mode. Beyoncé framed it as psychology, a switch that helps her step into arena-level confidence. In theater and sport, that idea is ordinary. Many performers describe a stage self that can handle what the private self cannot. But conspiracy spaces heard alter ego and tried to translate metaphor into possession or occult influence. When people want a shocking explanation, they treat a creative tool like a confession. When someone performs with that much power, do you credit training or do you assume something supernatural must be involved? Another engine for rumor is her symbolism. Beyoncé frequently draws from Black Southern church traditions, African diasporic history, and mythic ideas of feminine strength. Her visuals reference ancestry, motherhood, survival, and freedom, using iconography rooted in cultures far older than American pop. For many viewers, this reads as pride and remembrance. For others who don't recognize those traditions, it can feel unfamiliar, and fear gets mislabeled as witchcraft or occult theater. That misreading says more about the viewer's lens than about the artist's intent. In 2018, a former drummer filed a sensational restraining order request claiming Beyoncé used dark magic. The court dismissed the filing for lack of evidence, but the accusation spread faster than the outcome. After that, social media found proof in performance clips, slowed down footage, lighting shifts, or split-second facial expressions mid-choreography were replayed as demonic signs. In reality, cameras distort motion spotlights, change shadows, and intense physical effort can warp a face for a fraction of a second. Viral editing can make ordinary stage physics look paranormal if you're already hunting for monsters. Beyoncé's response has mostly been to keep moving. She rarely debates fringe narratives or explains every symbol. Instead, she rehearses tours, records, and builds the next era. In today's attention economy, silence can be misread as guilt, but it can also be the most sensible refusal to feed misinformation. So where does that leave the Satanic Secrets headline nowhere factual? There is no credible evidence tying Beyoncé to Satanism or secret rituals. What is credible is her disciplined cultural ambition and the way her art insists on Black history and Black joy being treated as epic. The larger her success grows, the more some people reach for supernatural stories to make that success feel smaller and safer. But Beyoncé doesn't need a myth to explain her rise, only the truth talent work and a vision too large to ignore. Tina Turner. Tina Turner's life has sometimes been wrapped in whispers about curses and dark forces, but the real documented story is already more gripping and more important than any supernatural rumor. Born Anna Mae Bullock in 1939 in Nutbush, Tennessee, she grew up in the segregated rural South where church hard work and survival shaped daily life. Her voice carried that world in it, a gritty, soaring instrument that could sound joyful and bruised in the same breath. Music wasn't a fantasy for Tina. It was a way out. Her path changed when she met Ike Turner in the late 1950s. Ike was a talented band leader with a sharp musical ear, and he recognized Tina's power quickly. Their first big breakthrough, A Fool in Love, 1960, launched the Ike and Tina Turner Revue into national visibility. On stage, the Revue was explosive, fast, disciplined, and electric. Tina's performance style was unlike anything most audiences had seen: athletic movement, raw, emotion, and a voice that felt like it could crack concrete. They became one of the most exciting live acts of the 1960s and early 1970s, touring constantly and earning a reputation for shows that left crowds stunned. But behind the curtain, Tina's life was a nightmare. She later described years of severe physical abuse, psychological cruelty, and climate of fear control. This is the true darkness in her story. Not magic, not demons, but domestic violence. Ike's need to dominate her personally and professionally created a cage she struggled to escape. Over time, the trauma eroded her health and spirit. In 1973, she attempted suicide, an act she would later frame not as weakness, but as the point where she realized she could not survive that life much longer. Around the same period, Tina encountered Nichiren Buddhism and began chanting Nam-myoho Renge Kyo. She spoke about chanting as a lifeline, a practice that helped her rebuild self-worth and inner steadiness while her outer world was still violent. Some people outside her experience later described her situation in curse language as if she were battling an unseen spell. Tina's own account is clearer and more human. She was battling fear trauma and the psychological chains of abuse. The spiritual practice gave her strength to imagine a future beyond Ike's control. In 1976, she finally fled after a violent incident during a tour. She left with almost nothing, famously just a small amount of money and a credit card, choosing uncertainty over a certainty that was killing her. The divorce that followed was not a glamorous ending. Tina gave up property and financial claims, keeping only her stage name. For several years, she rebuilt in the margins, performing wherever she could, taking smaller gigs and slowly reintroducing herself to audiences who still remembered her fire. Her comeback in the 1980s became legendary. Private Dancer 1984 transformed her into a solo global superstar in her mid-40s, an age when the industry routinely sidelines women. What's Love Got to Do with It and Better Be Good to Me weren't just hits. They were proof of reinvention. She wasn't surviving anymore. She was commanding the world on her own terms. Over the following decades, she continued to tour, record, and shape an image of resilience without pretending the past hadn't happened. Pharrell Williams. Pharrell Williams is the kind of cultural figure whose longevity has inspired both admiration and absurd rumor. Online people joke that he's a vampire, an immortal, or someone hiding dark secrets to stay young. But when you step back from the noise, the real story is far more grounded and, honestly, more impressive. Pharrell's career is a lesson in sustained creativity, sharp instincts, and the quiet power of consistent habits. Born in 1973 in Virginia Beach, Pharrell grew up surrounded by a blend of church music, hip-hop, funk, and skate culture. He started as a drummer, which shaped his musical mind. He hears rhythm as the skeleton of everything. In high school, he met Chad Hugo, and together they became the Neptunes, a production duo that helped define the sound of late 1990s and 2000s pop. What made the Neptunes special wasn't just the number of hits they had a signature. Their tracks were lean but elastic, built on crisp drum patterns, odd little synth stabs and grooves that left plenty of oxygen for the artist. That approach turned them into go-to architects for stars across genres. From roughly 1998 onward, Pharrell's fingerprints landed everywhere, chart-topping work with Jay-Z, Britney Spears, Justin Timberlake, Gwen Stefani, Nelly, Snoop Dogg, and many others. At the same time, he launched N.E.R.D., a band that mixed rap, rock, funk, and skate kid attitude into a sleek hybrid. The point is, Pharrell wasn't famous for one era. He built multiple lanes at once, often before the mainstream realized those lanes existed. His sound managed to feel futuristic and catchy in the same breath, which is why his catalog still gets rediscovered by younger listeners. The shocking secret rumors around Pharrell mostly come from his appearance. For more than a decade, the internet has obsessed over how little his face seems to change. Old photos from the late 1990s look surprisingly similar to his recent ones. Jokes turned into conspiracy theories because people love a dramatic explanation. But the explanation Pharrell gives is boring, in the best way. He takes care of his skin. Drinks a lot of water, avoids heavy partying, and tries to sleep. In other words, he protects his body the way an athlete protects a career. When someone looks young for a long time, do you assume magic or do you assume routine? Pharrell's lifestyle fits the result. People who've worked with him often describe a calm, disciplined environment, focused sessions, steady schedules, a preference for clarity over chaos. Aging is affected by genetics, sure, but also by stress, sun exposure, diet, sleep, and long-term habits. Pharrell seems to treat health as part of craft, not vanity. That kind of consistency is less exciting than a myth, but it's far more believable. His influence also goes beyond music. Pharrell became a major fashion voice, collaborating with global brands and shaping streetwear aesthetics for years. He launched skincare and wellness projects, took leadership roles in design, and invested in creative education and community initiatives. These moves show the same core trait that made him a hitmaker. He notices cultural currents early and builds something durable inside them. So if we're being honest and refusing fake news, there's no evidence Pharrell Williams is hiding occult secrets or supernatural tricks. What he's really hiding is something simpler: patience. A long career, a youthful look, and a steady creative output aren't the result of a pact. They're the result of talent maintained carefully over time. In a world addicted to conspiracy, Pharrell stands as proof that sometimes the most unbelievable outcomes come from very believable choices repeated for decades. So what do we do with these 7 stories? Crossroads, lore, candlelit studios, night visitors, sacred symbols, courtroom accusations, survival mantras, and ageless memes. The historical record shows no solid proof of satanic pacts, only a collision of genius pressure, trauma, faith, and fame, plus the way America mythologizes black greatness. Yet myths don't survive for decades unless they touch a nerve. Some hear warning signs about the industry. Others hear projections of our anxieties onto Black power. Are these tales harmless folklore, or do they reveal who gets celebrated, controlled, or feared in music? Drop your take in the comments.